I was driving through Arizona, aiming to reach New Mexico by the next day. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. I was tired from the long drive and needed a place to rest for the night. I spotted a small roadside motel, the kind with a neon sign flickering on and off. It seemed as good a place as any to stop. I pulled into the gravel parking lot and walked into the office. The man behind the counter looked to be in his late 50s, with thinning hair and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He checked me in, handed me a key, and gave me directions to my room. Room 8, towards the back of the lot. The room was basic but clean enough. A bed, a small table, and a TV. I locked the door and settled in, looking forward to a good night's sleep. After a quick shower, I lay down on the bed, scrolling through my phone. Something didn't feel right, but I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place. As I was about to drift off to sleep, I noticed a small red light blinking in the corner of the room. I got up to investigate and found a hidden camera tucked behind the air vent. My heart started pounding. I scanned the room and found another camera hidden behind a painting on the wall. Panic set in as I realized there could be more. I quickly packed my things and decided to confront the motel owner. As I stepped outside, I saw him standing by the office, watching me. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. I approached him, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are cameras in my room," I said, trying to sound firm. "I want my money back, and I'm leaving." He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me a live feed from one of the cameras in my room. "You don't want to leave," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Unless you want everyone to see these videos." My stomach turned. He was blackmailing me. I felt trapped and helpless. He told me to go back to my room and wait for further instructions. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I considered calling the police, but what if he had connections? What if they didn't believe me? I returned to my room, feeling more vulnerable than ever. I couldn't stay here, but I also couldn't leave without risking the footage being released. I needed a plan. I checked my phone and found that the reception was spotty, making it difficult to call for help. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't answer, hoping whoever it was would go away. The knocking continued, more insistent this time. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was the motel owner. "Open the door, Lisa," he said, his voice muffled but clear. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. I backed away from the door, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. The only thing that came to mind was the lamp on the bedside table. I picked it up, my hand shaking. The door handle jiggled, and I realized he was trying to get in. I needed to act fast. I threw the lamp at the window, shattering the glass. The noise startled him, and I took the opportunity to climb out the window, cutting my hands on the broken glass. I ran towards my car, not looking back. I could hear him shouting, but I didn't stop. I fumbled with my keys, finally managing to unlock the door. I jumped in and started the engine, my hands still trembling. As I sped out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was standing in the doorway, watching me with that same cold look. I drove for miles, not stopping until I reached a larger town. I found a police station and reported what had happened. The officers took my statement and assured me they would investigate. They offered me a safe place to stay for the night, which I gladly accepted. The next day, I received a call from the police. They had raided the motel and found multiple hidden cameras in several rooms. The owner was arrested and charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and extortion. They assured me the footage would be destroyed and that I was safe. It took me a while to shake the feeling of being watched, but eventually, I started to feel normal again. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Tom and I were driving through Nevada, and we were getting tired. The sun was setting, and we needed a place to stay for the night. We found a cheap motel by the highway. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. It looked run down, but we were too exhausted to be picky. We walked into the office, where a man with greasy hair and a stained shirt greeted us. His smile was off, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. He handed us the key to room 12 and gave us directions. We thanked him and walked to our room. The room was small and smelled musty. The bed looked clean enough, but there were stains on the carpet and the walls had peeling paint. We decided to make the best of it. We unpacked a few things and settled in. Tom turned on the TV, but it only had static. We laughed it off, trying to keep our spirits up. As we were getting ready for bed, I noticed a dark stain on the floor near the bathroom door. I got closer and realized it was blood. My heart started pounding. I called Tom over, and he confirmed my worst fear. It was definitely blood. We stood there, trying to make sense of it. Tom suggested we go back to the office and report it. I agreed, so we locked the room and headed back. The man at the desk seemed annoyed when we told him about the blood stain. He insisted it was nothing, probably just an old stain that hadn't been cleaned properly. He offered to give us a different room, but something felt wrong. We decided to stay in room 12 and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. As we walked back, we noticed there were no other cars in the parking lot. It was strange, considering it was a busy highway. We shrugged it off and went back inside. We locked the door and pushed a chair against it, just to be safe. We tried to sleep, but every noise outside made us jump. Around midnight, we heard footsteps outside our room. They stopped right in front of our door. We held our breath, waiting. After a few minutes, the footsteps moved away. Tom whispered that we should leave. I agreed. We quickly packed our bags and quietly opened the door. The hallway was empty. We made our way to the car, trying to stay as quiet as possible. As we reached the car, we heard a door creak open behind us. We turned and saw the motel owner standing there, watching us. His eyes were dark, and his smile was gone. He didn't say anything, just stood there. We jumped into the car and sped off, leaving the motel behind. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just escaped something terrible. We drove for a while until we found a diner that was open 24 hours. We went inside, ordered coffee, and tried to calm down. We talked about what had happened and decided to call the police. We told them about the bloodstain and the strange behavior of the motel owner. They said they would send someone to check it out. The next morning, we received a call from the police. They found more bloodstains in room 12 and other rooms. They also found evidence that suggested the previous occupants had never checked out. The motel owner was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The police thanked us for reporting it and said we had likely saved lives by doing so. The experience left us shaken. We couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if we had stayed. I arrived at the motel late that night. It was one of those long, exhausting business trips, and I just wanted to get some rest before my meetings in the morning. The motel was off the highway, nothing fancy, just a place to crash for the night. I checked in, got my room key, and headed to my room on the second floor. The hallways were dimly lit, and the carpet was worn out. Once inside my room, I locked the door, threw my bag on the bed, and decided to take a shower. The hot water helped me relax, and I felt a bit more human afterward. I put on some comfortable clothes and turned on the TV for some background noise. I was flipping through channels when I noticed something strange. The curtain in my room was slightly open, and I could see a shadow moving outside. I got up and peeked through the gap, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing across the parking lot, staring straight at my window. I felt a chill run down my spine. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching. I quickly closed the curtain and tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just some random guy passing by, but it felt off. I sat back on the bed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I glanced at the clock. It was close to midnight. I decided to call the front desk. I explained what I saw, and the clerk assured me that they would send someone to check it out. I hung up and tried to relax, but my heart was still racing. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up and looked through the peephole. It was the night manager, and he was looking around, checking the area. He knocked on my door, and I opened it just a crack. He asked me to describe the man, and I did my best. He nodded and told me to stay inside, that they would handle it. I thanked him and closed the door, feeling a bit better. But the feeling didn't last long. About an hour later, I heard a noise outside my window. It sounded like scratching. My heart started pounding again. I went to the window and slowly pulled the curtain back. The man was there, right outside, trying to open the window. I stepped back, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation. They told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. I hung up and looked around for something to defend myself with. The best I could find was a lamp, so I grabbed it and stood near the door. The scratching stopped, and everything went silent. I stood there, gripping the lamp, trying to listen for any sound. Then, I heard footsteps coming down the hall again. I peeked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers. I quickly opened the door and let them in. They asked me to describe the man again, and I did. One of the officers stayed with me while the other went outside to look around. After a few minutes, the officer returned. He said they couldn't find anyone, but they would patrol the area throughout the night. They advised me to keep my door locked and call if I noticed anything else unusual. I thanked them, and they left. I tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, imagining the man was trying to get in. I stayed up all night, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, I packed up my things and checked out as soon as I could. I didn't care that I had another night booked. I just wanted to get out of there. I drove to my meetings, still shaken from the night before. I couldn't concentrate, kept looking over my shoulder. I told my colleagues what happened, and they were sympathetic, but it didn't help much. The whole experience left me paranoid, always feeling like someone was watching me. Even now, I can't stay in motels. Every time I travel for work, I make sure to book a hotel with good security. We were on a road trip, just my wife, our 2 kids, and me. It was supposed to be a fun family vacation, driving through the countryside and stopping at motels along the way. We were on our way to visit some relatives we hadn't seen in a while. Everything was going great until that night. We pulled into a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of a quiet town. It was the only place around for miles, and it was getting late. The sign flickered, and the paint was peeling off the walls, but we were tired and just needed a place to sleep. The manager was an older man, friendly enough, who gave us a room key with a smile. Room 12. Our room was at the end of a long hallway. It smelled a bit musty, but it seemed clean enough. The kids were excited, jumping on the beds while my wife and I unpacked. After a quick dinner of takeout, we settled in for the night. I turned on the TV, trying to find something for the kids to watch while my wife got ready for bed. Around 10 p.m., we heard a knock at the door. I thought it was odd, but maybe it was the manager checking if we needed anything. I opened the door a crack, and before I knew it, 3 men barged in, pushing me back. They had guns and were shouting, telling us to be quiet and not to move. My heart was pounding. One of the men grabbed my wife and pushed her onto the bed with the kids. The other 2 forced me into a chair and tied my hands behind my back. My kids were crying, and my wife was trying to comfort them while keeping herself calm. The men were dressed in dark clothes, their faces covered with ski masks. They looked desperate and dangerous. "We're not here to hurt you," one of them said, though his voice didn't reassure me. "We just need a place to lay low for a while. Do as we say, and you'll be fine." The leader, the one who had spoken, seemed the most level-headed. He kept glancing at his watch and out the window. The other 2 were more jittery, pacing back and forth. They kept the guns trained on us, watching our every move. We sat there for what felt like hours, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way to get my family out of this alive. I could hear my kids whispering, scared, asking my wife what was going on. She kept telling them it would be okay, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I tried to talk to the men, to reason with them. "Please, we won't cause any trouble. Just let my family go, and you can stay here." The leader looked at me, considering. "Shut up," he finally said. "You're not in a position to make demands." Time dragged on. The men were getting more nervous. They talked among themselves in low voices, making plans. I caught bits and pieces about a getaway car and meeting someone. They were waiting for someone to come get them. I realized then that they weren't just hiding out, they were on the run. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there and hope they'd let us go. I started to work on the knots binding my wrists, trying to loosen them without drawing attention. My wife noticed and gave me a subtle nod, understanding what I was trying to do. Suddenly, there was a noise outside. The men tensed up, their guns aimed at the door. The leader motioned for us to be quiet, and we all held our breath. There was a knock, and then a voice calling out. It was the motel manager. "Everything okay in there?" he called. "Just doing a check." The leader swore under his breath and motioned for one of the other men to open the door. The manager's eyes widened when he saw the guns and us tied up. Before he could react, the man at the door grabbed him and pulled him inside. The situation was getting worse. The manager was now a hostage too, tied up next to me. The men were arguing, their nerves fraying. I knew we had to act soon or things could get deadly. I finally got my wrists free. I kept my hands behind my back, waiting for the right moment. The men were distracted, yelling at each other about what to do next. I glanced at my wife and gave her a look, hoping she'd understand. In a split second, I jumped up and tackled the nearest man, wrestling for his gun. My wife grabbed a lamp and swung it at another, hitting him on the head. The kids were screaming, and chaos erupted in the small room. The man I tackled was strong, but I was fighting for my family's life. I managed to get the gun and pointed at him. "Drop it," I shouted. "Everybody, drop it." The men hesitated, but seeing the gun in my hand, they slowly put their weapons down. The leader cursed and glared at me, but they complied. I kept the gun trained on them while my wife untied the manager and the kids. We backed out of the room, the manager leading us to the office where he called the police. The men didn't follow. They knew they were caught. The police arrived quickly, surrounding the motel and arresting the 3 men. They were wanted for a string of robberies and had been on the run for days. They'd chosen our room by chance, a random act that could have ended tragically. We were shaken but safe. The manager apologized repeatedly, offering us a free stay, but we declined. We just wanted to get out of there, away from the nightmare. We drove to a nearby town and found another motel, one with better security. That night, none of us slept well. The kids had nightmares, and my wife and I stayed up, holding each other and thanking our luck. It was a trip we'd never forget, but for all the wrong reasons. I was on a solo road trip, taking a break from work and everything. It felt good to drive through the open roads, with the wind in my hair and the radio playing my favorite songs. After a long day of driving, I decided to find a place to stay for the night. I spotted a small, rundown motel off the highway. It looked old and a bit sketchy, but I was too tired to keep driving. I pulled into the parking lot and went to the front desk. The manager was a rough-looking guy, not very friendly, but he gave me a key to room 7. The room was small and smelled musty, but it had a bed and a shower, and that was enough for me. I locked the door behind me and tried to relax. After a quick shower, I got into bed, thinking I'd watch some TV before falling asleep. But as I flipped through the channels, I heard voices outside. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then I heard a loud argument. Curious and a bit nervous, I turned off the TV and listened closely. The voices were getting louder. It sounded like a group of men arguing. I got up and peeked through the curtains. There were 3 men standing near a black SUV, parked just a few rooms down from mine. They looked angry, gesturing wildly and shouting at each other. I felt a knot in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I decided to stay out of sight and listen. The more I listened, the more I realized they were talking about a drug deal. My heart started pounding. I was in the middle of something dangerous, and I needed to stay out of sight. Suddenly, one of the men pulled out a gun. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a heated argument, this was serious. I backed away from the window, trying to think of what to do. If they saw me, I'd be in big trouble. The shouting turned into a scuffle. I could hear the sounds of a fight, followed by a gunshot. I froze. Someone had been shot, and I was stuck in a room just a few feet away. I needed to get out of there, but how? I decided to sneak out the back window. I grabbed my bag and slowly opened the window, trying to be as quiet as possible. The night was cold and dark, and the only light came from the flickering motel sign. I slipped out and crouched behind a bush, trying to figure out my next move. The men were still shouting, but now it sounded more frantic. I heard another gunshot, and then the sound of a car door slamming. I peeked around the bush and saw the SUV speeding away, leaving one man lying on the ground. He wasn't moving. I had to call the police, but my phone was inside the room. I couldn't go back in there. I decided to make a run for the motel office. Staying low, I moved from bush to bush until I reached the front desk. The manager was gone, but there was a phone on the counter. I picked it up and dialed 911, my hands shaking. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I told them everything I had seen, trying to stay calm. They assured me help was on the way and told me to stay inside and lock the door. I hung up and looked around the empty office. I locked the door and waited, my heart racing. It felt like forever, but finally, I heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside, and I saw several police cars pull into the parking lot. Officers got out, guns drawn, and approached the scene. One of them came to the office door and knocked. I unlocked the door and let him in, telling him everything I knew. He nodded and asked me to stay put while they secured the area. I watched as they checked the rooms and the surrounding area. They found the man on the ground and called for an ambulance, but it was too late for him. The police spent hours at the motel, questioning me and gathering evidence. They thanked me for calling them and told me I had done the right thing. It was almost dawn by the time they finished, and I was exhausted. The manager finally showed up, looking annoyed and confused. He had no idea what had happened, and the police had a lot of questions for him. I decided I didn't want to stay there any longer. I thanked the officers and got back in my car, ready to leave that nightmare behind. As I drove away, the sun was rising, casting a soft glow over the landscape. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I had witnessed something terrible, but I was safe. I learned to be more careful about where I stayed and to trust my instincts. I had been driving all day through the Midwest, just looking for a place to rest for the night. I spotted a small, secluded motel off the highway and decided it was as good a place as any to stop. It looked old and kind of run down, but I was too tired to be picky. I parked my car and went into the office. The manager was an older guy, seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about his eyes. He gave me a key to room 6 and told me to enjoy my stay. I nodded and headed to my room, trying not to overthink it. The room was what I expected, small, with outdated furniture and a musty smell. I locked the door behind me and dropped my bag on the bed. After a quick shower, I lay down, hoping to get some sleep. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence. The local news was on, and they were talking about a serial killer in the area, targeting motel guests. My heart skipped a beat. They said the killer had struck at a few motels nearby, and the police were advising travelers to be cautious. I turned off the TV and tried to shake off the unease. It was probably just my imagination running wild. I locked the door and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. Then I lay back down, telling myself I'd be fine. As night fell, I started hearing strange noises outside. At first, it was just rustling, like the wind in the trees. But then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. My pulse quickened. I got up and looked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. I tried to calm myself down. It could be another guest, or maybe the manager making his rounds. But the footsteps didn't go away. They seemed to be getting closer. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone, ready to call for help if I needed to. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, listening intently. Then there was a soft knock. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't move, hoping whoever it was would go away. But the knocking continued, more insistent this time. I had to do something. I quietly moved to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I frowned, confused. Maybe it was just a prank. I turned to go back to bed, but then I heard the doorknob rattle. Someone was trying to get in. Panic surged through me. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping it would hold. The rattling stopped, and everything went silent again. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I didn't even see who it was. I decided to wait it out and see if the noises stopped. Minutes felt like hours. I heard more footsteps, moving away from my door and down the hall. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe whoever it was had given up and left. Just as I was starting to relax, there was a loud bang on my window. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. I crept to the window and peered out. In the darkness, I could just make out a shadowy figure standing there, watching me. Fear gripped me. I knew I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my bag and quietly opened the door, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty. I slipped out and made my way to the parking lot, sticking to the shadows. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I finally got the door open and jumped in, locking the doors behind me. I started the engine and sped out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. I drove until I found another motel, this one a bit more populated. I checked in and locked myself in the room, double-checking all the locks and windows. It was only then that I allowed myself to breathe. I never did find out who was outside my room that night, or if it was really the serial killer the news had talked about. But I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't be staying in any secluded motels again. My friend Jenna and I were on a road trip, just wanting to get away from the city for a while. We didn't have a strict plan, just a rough route and a desire to explore. We drove until we were too tired to go any further, and that's how we ended up at this rundown motel. It was late, probably close to midnight, when we pulled into the parking lot. The neon sign flickered, and the place looked like it hadn't seen a renovation in decades. But we were exhausted and didn't feel like searching for another place to stay. The manager was a greasy-looking guy with a thin mustache. He checked us in without much small talk, handed us the key to room 8, and told us breakfast was served at 7. His eyes lingered a little too long on us, but we shrugged it off. Our room was dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew. The bed creaked when we sat on it, and the bathroom light flickered ominously. But it was a place to sleep, and that's all we cared about at that moment. We unpacked a bit and decided to head to bed. As I lay there, I could hear noises from the other rooms. Voices, some laughter, and what sounded like a baby crying. I figured it was just other guests settling in for the night. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. It was a muffled thumping, like someone was trying to move heavy furniture. I looked over at Jenna, but she was sound asleep. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep. The next morning, we went to the small dining area for breakfast. There were only a few other guests, and everyone seemed to keep to themselves. We ate quickly and decided to spend the day exploring the nearby town. When we returned that evening, the parking lot was emptier. Some of the cars that had been there the night before were gone. We didn't think much of it until we overheard a couple arguing with the manager about their missing friends. They were frantic, saying their friends had never returned to their room. The manager shrugged it off, saying people come and go all the time. His dismissive attitude sent a chill down my spine. Back in our room, Jenna and I talked about what we'd heard. We agreed it was strange, but we didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, we decided to keep an eye out for anything unusual. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing those muffled thumps again, along with other strange noises. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside our door. They stopped for a moment, then continued down the hallway. I got out of bed and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but I saw shadows moving under one of the doors a few rooms down. My heart was racing, but I couldn't just do nothing. I woke Jenna up and told her what I'd seen. We decided to quietly check it out. We crept down the hallway, trying to be as silent as possible. When we got to the door, we could hear muffled voices inside. I looked through the keyhole and saw two men dragging a woman across the room. She was unconscious or worse. Jenna gasped quietly, and I pulled her back towards our room. Back in our room, we tried to figure out what to do. We couldn't stay here, but we also couldn't just leave those people. We decided to call the police, but when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. They had cut the line. Our cell phones had no signal, likely due to the remote location. We were trapped. Panic set in, but we knew we had to stay calm and think of a plan. We packed our bags quietly, ready to make a run for it. As we opened the door, we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. We quickly shut it and locked it again, holding our breath. The footsteps stopped right outside our door, and then we heard a knock. "Housekeeping," a voice called out. We didn't answer. After a few moments, the footsteps moved on. We waited until we were sure it was safe, then quietly slipped out and headed for the back exit. We made it to the parking lot and were about to get in our car when we heard a shout. The manager and one of the men we saw earlier were coming towards us. We jumped into the car, and Jenna fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and we sped out of there, not daring to look back. We drove until we found a diner with a payphone and called the police. They took our statement and assured us they would investigate. A few days later, we heard on the news that the motel had been raided. The owners were part of a human trafficking ring, and they had been using the motel as a front. They found several victims, some of whom had been missing for months. Jenna and I were shaken but relieved that we had made it out. We were lucky. I still have nightmares about what could have happened if we hadn't escaped. Now, I'm always cautious about where I stay and who I trust. I had been driving for hours, feeling the weight of the road and the fatigue setting in. It was late, probably around midnight, when I finally saw a flickering motel sign in the distance. I decided to pull in, desperate for some rest. The motel looked run down, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. I parked my car and walked into the small office. The clerk behind the desk looked bored, barely glancing up as I asked for a room. He handed me a key, room number 12, and I thanked him before heading back out. I dragged my suitcase across the cracked pavement, trying to keep my eyes open. When I reached room 12, I inserted the key and pushed the door open. The room was dark, but I could make out shapes in the dim light. As I stepped inside, I heard a muffled sound. I turned on the light and froze. There, in the middle of the room, was a couple tied up and gagged. Their eyes widened in terror when they saw me. My heart started pounding, and I took a step back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to see a man standing in the doorway, his face twisted in anger. He was holding a knife, and his eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me as he stepped closer. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice low and threatening. I was given this key," I stammered, holding up the key as if it would explain everything. The man looked at the key, then back at me. His grip on the knife tightened. "Get in here," he ordered, pushing me further into the room. He shut the door behind him, and I could hear the click of the lock. The couple on the floor were struggling, their muffled cries filling the room. The man walked over to them, glaring at me the whole time. "If you try anything, they die," he warned. I nodded, my mind racing. How had I ended up in this situation? I needed to think of a way out, but my brain felt like it was moving through molasses. The man walked over to me, his knife still in hand. "You're going to help me," he said, his voice cold and calm. "Or you'll end up just like them." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "First, you're going to take their car and move it to the back lot. Make it look like they left," he instructed. I nodded, taking the keys he handed me. I glanced at the couple, their eyes pleading with me to help them. I gave them a small nod, hoping they understood that I was going to do my best to get us all out of this alive. I left the room and found their car in the parking lot. I drove it around to the back, out of sight. My hands were trembling as I parked it and turned off the engine. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I needed to stay focused if I was going to get out of this. When I returned to the room, the man was waiting for me. "Good," he said, a twisted smile on his face. "Now, you're going to help me with them." He pointed to the couple on the floor. "Untie them," he ordered, but the way he was holding the knife made it clear he didn't want me to set them free. I knelt down and started untying the ropes, my mind racing for a plan. As I worked, I could feel the man's eyes on me, watching my every move. The couple was shaking, but they remained still, not wanting to provoke their captor. Once they were untied, the man forced them to stand. He kept the knife pressed against the woman's side, his eyes never leaving me. "We're going to the car," he said. "You're driving." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We walked out of the room, the couple in front and the man behind them, keeping the knife hidden from view. We made our way to my car, and I unlocked the doors, trying to keep my hands steady. "Get in," the man ordered, shoving the couple into the back seat. He climbed in after them, keeping the knife ready. "You drive," he said, pointing the blade at me. I got into the driver's seat, my mind racing for a way out. As I started the car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The couple's eyes were wide with fear, but they were silent, waiting for a chance to escape. I pulled out of the motel parking lot and onto the dark, empty road. The man kept the knife close to the woman's side, his eyes fixed on me. "No funny business," he warned. We drove for what felt like hours, the silence in the car heavy and oppressive. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my mind racing for a plan. I needed to get us out of this, but I didn't know how. Finally, I saw a gas station up ahead. It was brightly lit, a beacon in the darkness. "I need gas," I said, hoping he would let me stop. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But no tricks." I pulled into the gas station and parked by the pump. I got out of the car, my mind racing. As I started to fill the tank, I saw the station attendant inside. I knew I had to act fast. I walked towards the station, pretending to go inside to pay. As soon as I was out of the man's sight, I sprinted inside and shouted for help. The attendant looked up, startled, but quickly understood the urgency in my voice. He called the police, and within minutes, the place was swarming with officers. They surrounded my car, guns drawn. The man was forced to drop the knife and surrender. The couple was pulled to safety, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We gave our statements to the police, and they assured us the man would be brought to justice. The couple thanked me over and over, their gratitude overwhelming. I was just glad we had all made it out alive. I drove away from the gas station, my hands still shaking, but my heart finally beginning to calm. I knew I would never forget this night, and I would always be grateful for the second chance we had been given. I was staying at this old motel just off the highway. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cheap, and I needed a place to crash for the night. The room smelled a little musty, and the carpet had seen better days, but it was fine for one night. I dropped my bag on the bed and decided to take a shower to wash off the long drive. After my shower, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a weird noise. It sounded like something scraping against the wall. I figured it was just the pipes or something, but it kept happening. It was coming from the closet. I opened the closet door, expecting to see a rat or something, but it was empty. Then I noticed a small crack in the back wall. Curious, I pushed on the wall, and to my surprise, it moved. There was a hidden door. My heart was racing as I pushed it open and found a narrow passage behind it. It was dark, and the air was colder back there. I hesitated but grabbed my phone for light and stepped inside. The passage was tight, and I had to crouch to get through. The walls were rough, and it smelled damp. As I moved further in, I found another door, this one made of metal. It creaked loudly when I opened it, and I stepped into a larger space, like a tunnel. There were more doors along the sides, and a faint light was coming from the end of the tunnel. I walked slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The tunnel led to a room that looked like some kind of office. There were papers and photos scattered everywhere. I picked up a photo and felt my stomach drop. It was a picture of a woman, tied up and gagged. She looked terrified. I dropped the photo and backed away, feeling sick. I needed to get out of there, but I heard voices coming from another tunnel. I ducked behind a stack of boxes, my heart pounding in my chest. Two men walked in, dressed in uniforms like the motel staff. They were talking about needing to clean up before morning. I felt a chill run down my spine. These guys were the ones doing this. I waited until they left, then I moved quickly, trying to find my way back. The tunnels were like a maze, and I was getting turned around. I found another room, this one with a row of lockers. One of the lockers was slightly open, and inside, I saw a pile of wallets and purses. These belonged to the people in the photos. I finally found the passage that led back to my room. I slipped through and closed the hidden door behind me, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there and call the police. I grabbed my bag and opened the door to my room, but one of the men from the tunnels was standing there. He looked as shocked as I felt. I tried to play it cool, saying I was just going out for a drink, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the room. I struggled, but he was strong. He dragged me towards the closet, but I kicked and screamed, knocking over a lamp. The noise must have startled him because he let go for a second, and I ran. I sprinted down the hall and out the front door of the motel. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station down the road. I burst in, panting and terrified, and told the clerk to call the police. I must have looked crazy, but he called them. When the police arrived, I told them everything. They went back to the motel, and I waited, shaking and scared. It felt like hours before they came back. They found the tunnels and the evidence. The men were arrested. The motel was shut down. It took a while for me to feel safe again. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. I was just lucky I found that passage and got out in time. I still get nightmares about it sometimes. Now, I always check the room before I settle in, and I stay away from old motels. I'll never forget that night. We were driving late at night, heading through a remote area when we decided to stop at a small, rundown motel. It was the only place for miles, and we were exhausted. The neon sign flickered, and the parking lot was nearly empty. We checked in and got our key from the old man at the front desk, who barely looked up from his book. Our room was shabby but clean enough. As we unpacked, I heard a faint noise outside. At first, I thought it was a cat or some other animal. But then I heard it again, a soft, muffled cry. I looked at my partner, Mark, and he nodded. We both went outside to investigate. In the corner of the parking lot, near a broken-down car, we found a small bundle. It was an infant, wrapped in a dirty blanket. The baby was crying softly, its little face red and scared. My heart sank. Who would leave a baby out here like this? We picked up the baby and hurried back to our room, trying to calm it down. We needed to call the authorities, but there was no cell signal in this remote area. The only option was the phone in our room. I dialed the front desk, but there was no answer. Mark decided to go to the office to get help. I stayed in the room, rocking the baby and trying to keep it calm. Minutes passed, and I started to worry when Mark didn't come back. The baby's cries grew louder, and I felt more and more uneasy. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. I wrapped the baby up again and went to find Mark. The hallway was dimly lit, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached the front desk, but it was empty. The old man was gone, and there was no sign of Mark. I heard a noise coming from behind the desk, like something being dragged. I walked around and saw a door slightly ajar. Inside, there was a staircase leading down. I hesitated but then heard a muffled cry for help. It was Mark. I descended the stairs, holding the baby close. The basement was cold and dark. I saw a light under a door at the far end. I moved quietly, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the door, I peeked through the crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were several children, all locked in cages. Mark was tied to a chair, and the old man from the front desk was talking to another man. They were discussing the shipment and how they needed to move the children soon. I realized with horror that we had stumbled upon a child trafficking ring. I backed away slowly, trying to think of a plan. I had to get Mark and the children out, but I couldn't do it alone. I decided to go back to our room and look for something that could help. On my way back, I found a fire extinguisher in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was something. I returned to the basement door and waited for the right moment. The old man and his partner were busy, so I quietly opened the door and slipped inside. I went to Mark first and used the extinguisher to break the ropes binding him. He was weak but managed to stand. We moved quickly, opening the cages and freeing the children. We had to be quiet, but some of them were so scared they started to cry. The men heard the noise and turned around. I raised the extinguisher and sprayed it in their faces, buying us a few precious seconds. We ran up the stairs, the children following closely. I slammed the door shut behind us and jammed a chair under the handle to buy us more time. We ran out into the parking lot, desperately looking for help. Just then, a car pulled in, and I waved frantically. The driver saw us and stopped. We explained the situation quickly, and he called the police. It felt like an eternity before they arrived, but when they did, they swarmed the motel. The two men were arrested, and the children were taken to safety. Mark and I were shaken, but we stayed to give our statements. The police thanked us for our bravery and told us that the traffickers had been wanted for a long time. They had been using the remote motel as a front for their operations. That night, as we finally drove away from that horrible place, we held hands tightly, the baby's cries still echoing in our ears. We knew we had done the right thing, but the memory of those terrified children would stay with us forever. We promised each other that we would always be vigilant and never ignore a cry for help, no matter how small. I was on a road trip and decided to stay at a small motel in the countryside. It was late, and I was tired. The neon sign flickered, and the place looked almost deserted. I pulled into the parking lot and went inside to check in. The caretaker was an older man with a creepy smile. He seemed overly friendly, asking too many questions about where I was from and where I was going. I didn't think much of it at first. I just wanted to get to my room and rest. The room was basic but clean enough. I threw my bag on the bed and sat down, flipping through the TV channels. After a while, I heard a knock on the door. It was the caretaker, bringing extra towels. He lingered in the doorway, making small talk. It felt off, but I was too tired to care. After he left, I locked the door and got ready for bed. As I lay there, something felt strange. The room was quiet, but I had this feeling like I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia from the long drive. I eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a soft clicking sound. It was coming from the vent above the bed. I got up and stood on a chair to get a closer look. Inside the vent, I saw a small camera lens. My heart started pounding. Someone was spying on me. I got down and quietly packed my things. I had to leave, but I didn't want the caretaker to know I was onto him. I slipped out of the room and headed towards the lobby. As I walked past the other rooms, I noticed they all had small holes drilled above the doors, probably for cameras. When I reached the lobby, the caretaker was sitting behind the desk, watching a bank of monitors. He didn't see me at first. I saw myself on one of the screens, walking towards the lobby. He must have seen the panic in my eyes because he stood up quickly and blocked the door. "What are you doing up so late?" he asked, that creepy smile still on his face. I tried to play it cool, saying I needed some air, but he didn't buy it. He grabbed my arm, and I panicked. I punched him as hard as I could, and he stumbled back. I ran out the door and into the parking lot, my heart racing. I jumped into my car and started the engine. The caretaker was right behind me, banging on the window, yelling. I floored it and sped out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I didn't stop until I reached the next town. At a gas station, I called the police and told them everything. They took my statement and promised to check it out. I didn't feel safe until I was far away from that motel. It took hours for me to calm down and get some rest in another motel, far from the countryside. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They had arrested the caretaker and found cameras in all the rooms. He had been spying on guests for years, recording their every move. They found tapes and files on hundreds of people. The thought of him watching me made my skin crawl. I was glad he was caught, but the experience shook me. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't noticed the camera. I started being more careful about where I stayed, always checking the rooms thoroughly. I was driving late at night when I decided to stop at a small, rundown motel off the highway. It was the only place around, and I was exhausted. The sign was flickering, and the parking lot was almost empty. I went inside to check in, and the man at the desk seemed friendly enough, though his smile felt forced. He gave me a room key and pointed me down the hall. The room was dingy but passable for one night. I tossed my bag on the bed and tried to unwind. After a while, I decided to take a shower. When I finished, I noticed the doorknob on my room door was loose. I twisted it, but it didn't budge. Panic started to set in when I realized I was locked in. I fiddled with the knob, trying to get it to turn, but it was useless. I banged on the door and called out, hoping someone would hear me, but the hallway outside remained silent. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi wasn't working either. I sat on the bed, trying to calm down and think. That's when I heard a noise coming from the adjoining room. It sounded like muffled voices and shuffling. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened. The voices were low, almost whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then I heard a faint cry, like someone was in pain. I knocked on the wall, hoping to get the attention of whoever was next door. The voices stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the door to the adjoining room opened, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. I rushed to the door and banged on it, shouting for help, but no one responded. My heart was racing. I felt trapped and helpless. I searched the room for anything that could help me get out. I found a metal coat hanger in the closet and tried to use it to jimmy the lock, but it was no use. The doorknob was completely jammed. The sounds from the adjoining room started again. This time, they were louder and more frantic. I heard what sounded like someone being dragged. I pressed my ear to the wall again and heard a woman's voice, pleading and crying. Fear gripped me as I realized I wasn't alone in this nightmare. Desperation took over. I started banging on the walls and shouting for help. The noises in the other room grew more intense, and I could hear the woman struggling. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. I backed away from the wall, trembling. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching my door. The doorknob rattled, and then there was a knock. I didn't know if it was someone coming to help or if it was whoever was in the other room. My heart pounded as I waited, unsure of what to do. "Hello," a voice called out. It was the man from the front desk. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I ran to the door and shouted that I was locked in. He said he would get the key and be right back. I waited anxiously, listening to his footsteps fade away. When he returned, he unlocked the door and opened it. I rushed out, thanking him profusely. But then I noticed his expression. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He grabbed my arm tightly and pulled me down the hall, ignoring my protests. He dragged me to the front office and shoved me inside. I stumbled and fell to the floor. When I looked up, I saw a woman tied to a chair, her face bruised and tear-streaked. The man looked down at me, his eyes cold and menacing. "Welcome to our little operation," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You shouldn't have made so much noise." I realized then that this was all a trap. The motel was a front for something sinister, and I had walked right into it. The man tied me to a chair next to the woman and left us there, locking the door behind him. The woman whispered that we needed to find a way out, but I couldn't see any way to escape. We struggled against our bonds, trying to loosen them, but they were too tight. Hours passed, and I felt my hope fading. Just when I thought all was lost, I heard sirens in the distance. The man came back, panic in his eyes. He hurried to untie us, threatening us to stay quiet. But as soon as he released my hands, I fought back with all the strength I had left. The police burst in moments later, guns drawn. They arrested the man and freed us. It turned out someone had heard my earlier screams and called the authorities. They found evidence of the motel's illegal activities and shut it down for good. Even though I got out alive, the experience left me scarred. I can still hear the cries of the woman in the next room and feel the grip of the caretaker's hand on my arm. We were on a road trip, and after hours of driving, we decided to stop at a small, out-of-the-way motel. It was late, and we were exhausted. The place didn't look like much, but it was cheap, and we needed rest. I was with my friends, Dave and Sam. We checked in and got a room with 2 beds and a fold-out couch. The room was basic but clean enough. We threw our bags down and decided to get some sleep. Around midnight, Just as we were dozing off, there was a loud knock at the door. It startled us. Dave got up to check who it was. When he opened the door, two men in police uniforms were standing there. They flashed their badges and said there was an issue and they needed to talk to us. It felt off, but they were cops, so we let them in. They asked us a bunch of questions about where we were from and what we were doing. Then, without warning, they told us to put our hands behind our backs. They said we were under arrest. We were confused and scared, but they had guns. They cuffed us and let us out of the room. There was a van waiting outside. They shoved us in the back and slammed the door shut. As the van started moving, we realized something was very wrong. Real cops don't do things like this. The drive seemed to go on forever. We were blindfolded, so we had no idea where we were being taken. When the van finally stopped, they pulled us out and removed the blindfolds. We were in some kind of abandoned warehouse. It was dark and cold. They pushed us into a small room and locked the door. We were terrified and tried to figure out what was happening. The room had nothing but a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. We whispered to each other, trying to stay calm. Hours passed. Then, one of the men came in. He didn't have the uniform on anymore. He looked rough, like he'd done this before. He told us to sit still and shut up. He left, and we started looking for a way out. There was a small window high up on the wall, but it was barred. The door was solid metal. We were trapped. Dave found a loose piece of metal on the floor, and we decided to use it as a weapon if we had to. A few hours later, the men came back. They started questioning us again, this time more aggressively. They wanted to know if we had any money, who knew where we were, and if anyone would miss us. They were trying to figure out if we were worth ransoming. When they left, we knew we had to get out of there. Sam suggested using the metal piece to try and break the lock. We worked on it for what felt like forever. Finally, we managed to get the door open a crack. We waited until we couldn't hear anyone outside and then made our move. We crept down the dark hallway, trying to stay as quiet as possible. We could hear voices in another room. We avoided it and kept moving. We found a door that led outside. It was locked, but Sam used the metal piece to jimmy it open. We stepped out into the night and saw we were in the middle of nowhere. There were woods in the distance, so we ran for them. We ran through the trees, branches whipping our faces, but we didn't stop. We could hear shouting behind us. They knew we had escaped. We kept running until we couldn't hear them anymore. We found a road and followed it until we came to a small town. We went straight to the police station and told them everything. They took us seriously and sent officers to the warehouse. They found the men and arrested them. They were part of a gang that kidnapped people for ransom. We were lucky to get out alive. It was the most terrifying experience of our lives. I still have nightmares about it. Now, whenever we travel, we're much more careful about where we stay and who we trust. We'll never forget that night and how close we came to never seeing daylight again. I was on a solo road trip, taking my time to see the country. One evening, I decided to stop at a small motel off the highway. It looked decent enough, and I was tired of driving. After checking in, I noticed a small diner next to the motel. I was hungry, so I went in to get something to eat. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers and an old couple in a corner booth. The cook was a middle-aged man with a gruff look. He greeted me with a forced smile and handed me a menu. I ordered a burger and fries, and a coffee to keep me awake for the drive the next day. While I waited for my food, I noticed the cook watching me from the kitchen. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured he was just bored. When my food arrived, I dug in. The burger tasted a bit off, but I was too hungry to care. I finished my meal and went back to my room. About an hour later, I started feeling sick. My stomach was cramping, and I felt nauseous. I thought maybe it was just food poisoning, something that would pass. But the pain kept getting worse. I was sweating and shaking, and my vision was getting blurry. I tried to call the front desk, but there was no answer. I decided to go down to the lobby to get help. When I opened the door, the hallway seemed to stretch forever. I could barely keep my balance as I walked. I finally made it to the lobby, but it was empty. I stumbled outside, hoping to find anyone who could help me. The cook was standing by the diner's entrance, smoking a cigarette. When he saw me, he walked over with that same forced smile. I told him I felt really sick and needed help. His smile faded, and he looked almost annoyed. He said it was probably just something I ate and that I should go back to my room and rest. He offered to bring me some water. I was desperate, so I agreed. I went back to my room, and he followed me with a bottle of water. He watched as I took a sip, then laughed. I tried to rest, but the pain was unbearable. My mind was racing. Something wasn't right. Why was the cook so indifferent? Why was there no one at the front desk? I decided I needed to leave, to find a hospital or something. I grabbed my keys and stumbled out to my car. As I started the engine, I saw the cook watching me from the diner. He had a strange look on his face, almost like he was enjoying my pain. I put the car in gear and sped out of the parking lot. The dizziness made it hard to drive, but I had to get away. I managed to find a gas station a few miles down the road. I stumbled inside and begged the cashier to call an ambulance. I collapsed on the floor, the room spinning around me. The last thing I remember was the sound of sirens getting closer. I woke up in a hospital bed. The nurse told me I had been poisoned. The police wanted to talk to me. I told them everything, about the motel, the diner, the cook. They looked concerned and left the room to make some calls. Later, a detective came in and told me they had arrested the cook. He had a history of poisoning guests, but they could never prove it until now. They found evidence in the diner's kitchen, enough to put him away for a long time. I was relieved, but the experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe how close I came to dying. The thought of that cook watching me suffer still haunts me. Now, I'm much more careful about where I eat and stay when I travel. The open road doesn't seem as inviting as it once did. I was on a long road trip, needing a place to crash for the night. The motel was cheap and looked decent enough, so I checked in and got a room on the second floor. It was late, and I was exhausted. I fell asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up coughing. The room was filled with smoke. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding. I could see flames flickering outside the window. Panic set in as I realized the motel was on fire. I grabbed my phone and wallet, then ran to the door. When I opened it, the hallway was filled with thick, black smoke. I couldn't see a thing. I tried to remember where the stairs were, but the smoke was disorienting. I covered my mouth with my shirt and moved as quickly as I could, feeling my way along the wall. As I made my way down the hall, I heard other guests shouting and coughing. The fire alarm was blaring, but it was almost drowned out by the roar of the flames. I found the stairwell and started down, but the smoke was getting thicker. I could barely breathe. Halfway down, I heard someone behind me. I turned and saw a man stumbling down the stairs, his face covered in soot. He was coughing violently, but he managed to gasp out a few words. Fire, it's revenge. I didn't have time to process what he was saying. I kept moving, trying to get to the ground floor. When I finally made it to the lobby, it was chaos. People were running in all directions, some of them covered in burns. The front desk was engulfed in flames. I pushed through the crowd and made it outside. The cold night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to clear my lungs. As I stood there, gasping for air, I saw the man from the stairs collapse on the ground. I ran over to help him, but he was barely conscious. Revenge on the owner, he muttered before passing out. I looked around, trying to find someone who could help, but the fire trucks hadn't arrived yet. The flames were spreading fast, and the entire building was in danger of collapsing. I dragged the man away from the building, hoping he would be safe. As I looked back at the motel, I saw someone standing in the parking lot, watching the fire with a strange intensity. It was a woman, and she had a cold, satisfied look on her face. She didn't seem to notice me at first, but then she turned and our eyes met. There was something unsettling about her gaze. She didn't look scared or worried, just calm. Too calm. I had a feeling she was connected to the fire. I approached her cautiously, not sure what to expect. "Did you see what happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She just stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I saw everything," she said, her voice eerily calm. "The owner of this place deserved it. He ruined my life." Before I could ask her anything else, I heard sirens approaching. The fire trucks finally arrived, and firefighters started to battle the flames. I turned to flag them down, but when I looked back, the woman was gone. She had disappeared into the night. The firefighters worked quickly, and soon they had the fire under control. I found an EMT and told them about the man I had dragged away from the building. They took him to an ambulance, and I finally had a moment to catch my breath. As I watched the firefighters, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Who was she? And what did she mean about revenge? I knew I needed to tell the police what I had seen, but I also knew that finding her would be nearly impossible. The fire was eventually put out, and the police started taking statements from the survivors. When it was my turn, I told them everything I had seen and heard. They took my information and said they would follow up, but I could tell they were skeptical. I left the motel, shaken and exhausted. I found another place to stay for the night, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames and heard the man's words echoing in my mind. The next day, I read about the fire online. The police were investigating it as arson, but they didn't have any suspects. The woman I had seen was still out there somewhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she would strike again. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. The open road didn't seem so inviting anymore. As I drove, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her following me. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't help it. Even now, months later, I still think about that night. The image of the woman's calm, cold eyes haunts me. I hope the police catch her before she hurts anyone else. I had been driving for hours, and it was getting late. I decided to stop at a cheap motel on the side of the highway. It didn't look like much, but I was too tired to keep going. The check-in process was quick, and the manager handed me the key to my room. I dragged my suitcase down the dimly lit corridor to room 107. The room was small and shabby, but it was a place to sleep. I took a quick shower, changed into my pajamas, and got into bed. I was just starting to doze off when I heard a loud bang against the wall. It startled me, and I sat up, listening. There was another bang, and then a man's voice shouting something I couldn't make out. It sounded like it was coming from the room next door. I tried to ignore it, but the shouting continued, getting louder and more aggressive. I could hear furniture being moved or knocked over. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the front desk but decided to wait and see if it would stop on its own. After what felt like an eternity, the noise finally stopped. I lay back down, trying to calm myself, but then I heard a faint tapping on the wall, like someone was knocking. It was soft at first, then got louder and more insistent. It felt like the man next door was trying to get my attention. I was scared now. I got up and went to the door, pressing my ear against it to listen. I could hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man standing outside my room, staring at my door. He looked disheveled and angry. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. The manager answered, and I told him about the man outside my room and the noise from the next door room. He sounded annoyed and said he'd send someone to check it out. I waited, heart pounding, until I heard footsteps approaching. The manager knocked on my door and asked me to open it. I did, and he stepped inside, looking around. He then went to the room next door and knocked. There was no answer. He used a key to open the door and stepped inside. A few moments later, he came back out, looking confused. "There's no one in there," he said. "The room is empty." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But I saw him," I insisted. "He was right outside my door." The manager looked at me skeptically. "Maybe you were dreaming," he suggested. "There's no one else staying in that room." I was too scared to argue. The manager left, and I locked my door, checking it twice to make sure it was secure. I got back into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jump. I kept my phone close, ready to call for help if I needed to. A couple of hours passed, and I finally started to drift off when I heard the tapping again. It was louder this time, more urgent. I sat up and listened, my heart pounding in my ears. The tapping turned into pounding, and then the shouting started again. It was the same angry voice, coming from the room next door. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them everything, about the noise, the man, and the manager's response. They said they would send someone to check it out. While I waited, the noise continued. The pounding on the wall, the shouting, and the tapping on my door. I was shaking with fear, feeling like I was losing my mind. Then, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. The noise stopped abruptly, and the silence was almost as terrifying. The police arrived and knocked on my door. I let them in, and they checked the room next door. Just like before, it was empty. They looked around the motel and talked to the manager, who insisted there were no other guests in that part of the building. The police didn't find anything suspicious, but they could see I was genuinely scared. One of the officers offered to stay until morning, just in case. I was grateful and managed to get a little sleep with him sitting outside my door. When morning came, I checked out as quickly as I could. The manager didn't seem surprised to see me go. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in that motel, something that left its mark on the place. Even now, I get chills thinking about it. I don't know who the man was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. It was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I checked into a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of town. I had been driving for hours and needed a place to rest. The man at the front desk, who introduced himself as Bob, seemed overly friendly. He asked a lot of questions about where I was coming from and where I was going. It felt strange, but I brushed it off as small talk. After checking in, I took my bags to my room. It was dingy and smelled a bit musty, but I was too tired to care. I put my things down and lay on the bed, thinking about the money I was carrying. I had sold my car earlier that day and had the cash in my bag. It was a lot of money, and I felt uneasy carrying it around, but I had no choice until I could deposit it the next morning. As I settled in, there was a knock on my door. It was Bob. He said he just wanted to make sure everything was all right with the room. I assured him it was fine, and he left, but not before glancing around the room in a way that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too interested in me. I tried to relax and watch some TV, but I kept hearing footsteps outside my room. At one point, I looked through the peephole and saw another staff member, a woman, standing there. She seemed to be listening at my door. When she noticed me looking, she quickly walked away. My unease grew, and I decided to keep my door locked and stay alert. I thought about calling someone, but it was late, and I didn't want to alarm anyone without good reason. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but my gut told me something was off. Around midnight, I heard voices outside my room again. This time, it was Bob and the woman, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was serious. I quietly moved closer to the door to listen better. "She's got a lot of cash," Bob said. "Saw it when she checked in. We need to move fast." My heart started pounding. They were planning to rob me. I needed to get out of there, but I had to be smart about it. I quickly gathered my things, making as little noise as possible. I remembered there was a back door near my room that led to the parking lot. It was my best chance to escape without running into them. I carefully opened my door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. I slipped out and headed towards the back door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys. I finally got to the door and pushed it open, stepping into the cool night air. I hurried to my car, glancing over my shoulder. Bob and the woman hadn't noticed I was gone yet. I threw my bags in the back seat and got in, starting the engine as quietly as I could. Just as I was about to pull away, I saw Bob and the woman burst out the back door, looking around frantically. I floored it, speeding out of the parking lot and down the road. My heart was racing, and I kept checking my rearview mirror to make sure they weren't following me. I drove until I found a well-lit gas station, where I pulled over and took a moment to collect myself. I called the police and told them everything that had happened. They said they would send a patrol car to the motel to investigate. I waited at the gas station, feeling a mix of fear and relief. After a while, an officer called me back and said they had detained Bob and the woman for questioning. They found evidence that suggested they had done this before to other guests. I eventually found another motel and checked in, making sure it was a reputable place this time. I couldn't sleep much that night, still shaken from the experience. The next morning, I went to the bank and deposited the money, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts. It was a terrifying experience, but I got out safe. I learned to be more cautious and to always trust my gut feeling. I never want to go through something like that again. I travel a lot for work. It was supposed to be just another trip, another night in another hotel. This time I was in a city I hadn't visited before. The hotel was one of those mid-range places, nothing fancy, but decent enough. I checked in late, around 10 p.m., after a long day of meetings and flights. I was exhausted. I got to my room on the third floor, unpacked a few things, and decided to take a quick shower. The room was typical: a bed, a desk, a TV, and a small bathroom. Everything seemed fine, but I had this weird feeling, like I was being watched. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired. After my shower, I changed into pajamas and started to unwind. I noticed the curtains were slightly open, so I went to close them. As I did, I glanced out and saw a man in the room across the courtyard, on the same floor, standing by his window. He was staring right at me. I quickly closed the curtains, feeling uneasy but trying to convince myself it was nothing. I turned on the TV and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I glanced at the window, half expecting to see him again. I decided to double-check the door lock. It was secure, but I put the chain on too, just to be sure. I tried to distract myself with some work, but my mind kept wandering back to that man. I didn't see him clearly, just a silhouette, but the way he was staring felt wrong. I told myself I was overreacting and forced myself to focus on my work. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every noise seemed amplified, every creak and groan of the building made my heart race. After what felt like hours, I finally started to drift off. I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. I didn't know why at first, then I heard it, the sound of someone trying to open my door. The handle rattled softly, then more forcefully. I froze, my mind racing. The chain held, but the door shook as the person outside tried harder to get in. I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk. My voice was shaking as I told them someone was trying to break into my room. The person on the other end said they'd send someone up immediately. The rattling stopped, and I heard footsteps walking away. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw a hotel employee. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on, and explained what had happened. The employee looked concerned and said they'd checked the security footage. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound made me jump. Around 6 a.m., I got up, packed my things, and went down to the front desk to check out. The manager was there and apologized profusely. They said they reviewed the footage and saw a man trying to get into my room, but they couldn't identify him. They offered me a refund and a different room for the rest of my stay, but I declined. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. I didn't feel safe there anymore. As I waited for my taxi, I saw the man again. He was sitting in the lobby, staring at me. Our eyes met, and he gave me a chilling smile. I got out of there as fast as I could. The ride to the airport was a blur. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. Even on the plane, I couldn't relax until we were in the air. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it. When I finally got home, I locked all my doors and windows and called my boss to explain why I cut the trip short. They were understanding and more concerned about my safety than anything else. That night, I slept with the lights on. It's been a few weeks since then, and I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I check into a hotel now, I make sure to double lock the door and keep my phone within reach. I haven't seen that man again, but the memory of his stare haunts me. I'm more cautious now, always aware of my surroundings. It's a lesson I wish I didn't have to learn the hard way.